world was shocked when Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy were found dead in their Santa Fe home weeks after their passing went unnoticed. As the investigation deepens, eerie signs suggest that someone knew about their deaths before anyone else. All eyes quickly turned to their daughter Leslie Ann. Was she hiding something darker? What was she trying to cover up? The answers may leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this family. What really happened behind those closed doors? Stay tuned to find out. Rumors and speculations surrounding Gene Hackman's death. The news of Gene Hackman's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood, but it wasn't the kind of passing anyone expected. His wife Betsy Arakawa was also found dead alongside him, and the situation quickly became one of the most puzzling tragedies in recent memory. The couple was discovered weeks after their deaths, and this fact alone raised serious questions. How could two well-known figures with ties to the public be left alone in their home for so long without anyone noticing? The first clues began to surface when the police arrived at their Santa Fe home. The door was barely ajar, and the mail had been piling up outside, untouched for weeks. It seemed like time had frozen inside the house. There were no signs of a break-in or violence, but everything felt off. Gene's body was found near the kitchen, in a position that didn't make sense, as though he had slumped there unexpectedly. Betsy's body was discovered in the bathroom, surrounded by pills scattered across the counter. The police couldn't find any obvious reason for their deaths, and there were no signs of struggle or foul play. But something wasn't adding up. As they continued to investigate, the question that haunted everyone was how had they been left undiscovered for so long? It didn't make sense for someone of Gene Hackman's stature to just slip under the radar. Rumors quickly swirled that someone must have known about their deaths before anyone else. Was it possible that someone had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to act? Or was there a more sinister reason that Gene and Betsy had been left alone in their home, their deaths hidden from the world for weeks? As the investigation began to unfold, the name of Gene's daughter, Leslie Ann, started to surface in the media. Was she involved in something darker? Was there more to her role in this tragedy than anyone had first suspected? Speculation grew, and the details surrounding the deaths of Gene and Betsy became more and more mysterious. There was no clear cause of death, no obvious sign of injury or poisoning. The whole situation seemed almost surreal, like something out of a mystery novel. But it was all too real. And the deeper the investigation went, the more it seemed that there was something much more complex going on behind the scenes. What exactly had happened in that house, and who knew what, when? That was the question that everyone wanted answers to. The investigation, Leslie Ann's involvement and suspicious behavior. The investigation into Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's deaths took a dark turn when the focus shifted to their daughter, Leslie Ann Hackman. At first, Leslie Ann was not considered a major person of interest in the case. However, as the days went by and the details of the couple's death began to surface, her involvement started to raise more questions than answers. When the police arrived at the Santa Fe home, they were met with an eerie silence. The house appeared to be frozen in time. Mail piled up outside, untouched for weeks, and the air inside stagnant, as if the house had not been disturbed. Gene Hackman's body was found near the kitchen, slumped over in a way that was difficult to understand, and Betsy Arakawa was found in the bathroom, surrounded by pills scattered on the counter. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no visible injuries, and no signs of a struggle. At first glance, it seemed like a case of natural causes. However, things didn't add up. The bodies were discovered weeks after their deaths, and no one had reported anything suspicious. How could two people, one of whom was a well-known Hollywood icon, go unnoticed for so long? When the autopsy reports came in, there was still no clear explanation for their deaths. No poison, no trauma, no cause of death that could easily be determined. It seemed to be one of those cases where no one had any concrete answers, but there was something hauntingly off about it all. Then, a breakthrough came when Gene Hackman's pacemaker, which had been implanted years earlier, provided some insight. The pacemaker had recorded its final action, and the timestamp revealed that Gene likely passed away on February 17th, weeks before anyone discovered the bodies. This piece of evidence gave the authorities a more specific timeline of when the couple had died, but it also raised more questions about why no one had checked on them during that time. As the investigation continued, things started to look even stranger. investigators uncovered that there had been unusual activity surrounding Gene's estate and financial records. This is where Leslie Ann's involvement became more suspicious. The first red flag came when Leslie Ann claimed to have spoken to her father just weeks before his death. However, when the authorities checked phone records, they discovered no such calls had been made. The phone logs show that there was no communication between Leslie Ann and her father for weeks prior to the discovery of the bodies. This was a significant discrepancy, and it raised serious concerns about her story. As investigators dug deeper, they found that Leslie Ann had been involved in discussions about her father's estate before his death was even publicly confirmed. Financial documents were reviewed, and it became clear that she had been making moves concerning her father's fortune long before the public knew Gene had passed away. She had been in contact with lawyers and had made arrangements to secure financial assets. These actions were alarming to the authorities, as they suggested that Leslie Ann might have been preparing for her father's death in advance. Moreover, Leslie Ann's behavior seemed increasingly erratic. As more details about the financial activities and legal discussions came to light, investigators found that she had made changes to important estate documents. These changes were made before Gene's death was even confirmed. There was no way for her to have known for certain that her father had passed away, yet she was acting as though she did. It was a chilling realization. Could Leslie Ann have known something the rest of the world didn't? Was she involved in a larger scheme to take control of her father's assets? The investigators found even more troubling evidence. Leslie Ann's bank records showed that she had moved money around in a way that seemed intentional. Large sums of money had been transferred to different accounts, some of which appeared to be offshore accounts, making them difficult to trace. These transactions were made before Gene's death was publicly acknowledged, and they raised serious concerns about the possibility that Leslie Ann was planning her father's death, or at least preparing to secure her inheritance ahead of time. As the investigation continued, Leslie Ann became more defensive. When the police confronted her with the evidence of her suspicious financial activities, she became agitated and struggled to explain her actions. Her statements seemed inconsistent, and the contradictions in her story began to pile up. She claimed that she had spoken to her father just days before his death, yet the phone records proved otherwise. She also claimed that she had no knowledge of the changes made to her father's estate documents, yet the paperwork showed her name on the revised documents. As the investigation grew more intense, Leslie Ann's reluctance to cooperate only deepened suspicions about her role in the deaths of her parents. Then, the final blow came when a thorough review of the security footage from the property showed that someone had been on the premises long before the police arrived. The footage revealed strange behavior and unexplained movements near the house, but no one was able to identify the individuals involved. The fact that someone had been watching the house before the police arrived added another layer of mystery to the situation. It was clear that someone knew what had happened, and the evidence was beginning to point directly at Leslie Ann. Investigators also found that Leslie Ann had been in contact with financial advisors and lawyers about the estate long before her father's death was confirmed. She had made plans and preparations that indicated a level of knowledge about her father's condition that went beyond what was publicly known. Her actions seemed calculated and deliberate, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss the possibility that she had played a role in her parents' deaths. As the investigation closed in on Leslie Ann, the shocking truth began to emerge. The evidence of her involvement in financial dealings, the discrepancies in her statements, and the suspicious behavior all painted a picture of someone who might have been more involved in her parents' deaths than anyone had previously realized. The authorities were now focusing their efforts on proving that Leslie Ann had orchestrated a scheme to secure her father's wealth, and possibly had a hand in his untimely death. The investigation was far from over, but one thing was clear. The longer the police dug into Leslie Ann's activities, the more suspicious her behavior appeared. What began as a tragic family loss had turned into a complex case of potential foul play, with Leslie Ann at the center of it all. The pieces were starting to come together, but the question remained, had Leslie Ann orchestrated her parents' deaths, or was there something else at play? The investigation was just beginning to uncover the truth, but with each new revelation it became harder to deny the unsettling possibility that Leslie Ann was involved in something much darker than anyone could have imagined.
Authorities in New Mexico are getting ready to share new details today of the investigation into the deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife and one of the couple's dogs. The bodies were found in their Santa Fe home last month. Carter Evans is there with the latest on this investigation. Carter, good morning. Can't wait to hear the latest on this story.
I know. We're looking forward to getting more information, Gail. Good morning. So far, investigators aren't giving many details about what they may reveal in today's news conference, but we do know the autopsies are complete, and we anticipate learning more about the results this afternoon. Still, many questions remain, including how they died. So here's what we know. Their bodies were found by a caretaker in their gated community on February 26th, and that's the person who called 911. Now, investigators say it appears the couple died in a similar time frame, about a week before they were found. We now know that on February 17th, Hackman's pacemaker stopped working. That's according to the Santa Fe sheriff, and we're expecting to learn a little more about that today.
Family reaction and consequences. The fallout from the estate battle. The news that Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy had passed away quietly in their Santa Fe home was the start of a story that no one could have predicted. What seemed like a tragic yet natural death quickly became a complex puzzle, and as the details unraveled, the fallout from the entire situation sent shockwaves through the Hackman family and beyond. For Gene's family, the news was a mixture of grief, disbelief, and confusion. It was hard for them to accept that he and Betsy had been gone for weeks without anyone noticing. They couldn't understand how such a thing could happen, especially with someone as well known as Gene. His siblings, children, and close family members were left reeling, not just from the loss, but from the eerie silence that surrounded the events. No one had checked in on them, no one had thought something was wrong, and no one knew that Gene and Betsy were gone until it was almost too late. However, as investigators began to dig into the circumstances surrounding their deaths, another layer of complexity was added to the tragedy. The Hackman family was thrown into disarray when they learned that Gene's daughter, Leslie Ann, was being investigated for her involvement in the case. What started as a personal tragedy quickly morphed into a public spectacle, and the family's world, which had already been shaken by the loss, was now being torn apart by the revelation that there might have been more to the story than anyone had realized. Leslie Ann's actions, both before and after her father's death, raised serious suspicions. It became clear that she had been involved in the management of her father's estate long before his death had been confirmed. She had made changes to legal documents, moved money around in ways that were difficult to explain, and even reached out to lawyers and financial advisors to secure her father's wealth. These actions were not only questionable, but they also pointed to the possibility that Leslie Ann had known about her father's deteriorating health before the public was made aware. The timing of her financial dealings seemed too precise, too calculated to be a coincidence. And when the investigators looked deeper into her bank records, it became clear that there were many more questions than answers. For the Hackman family, this was a betrayal that cut deep. Family members who had always trusted Leslie Ann were now questioning everything. How could someone who had been a part of the family for so long be capable of such actions? How could they have been so blind to the fact that Leslie Ann might have been involved in something far more sinister than anyone had realized? The pain of losing Gene and Betsy was compounded by the betrayal they felt from within their own family. It wasn't just a matter of grieving the loss of their loved ones. It was now a matter of confronting the possibility that one of their own had played a role in the tragedy.
When the bodies of Gene Hackman, his wife, and one of their dogs were found last week at their home in Santa Fe, it was unclear what circumstances had led to their deaths.
Santa Fe 911, what is it? Emergency?
Investigators have been piecing together the couple's movements. They now say they believe his wife, Betsy, had died around a week before him.
It's not uncommon to find someone down on the floor as part of a terminal collapse, so to speak, and that may very well have been what happened to Miss Hackman.
Test results showed she'd contracted a rare virus called hantavirus, which can be transmitted from animals to humans and can be fatal, and that Gene Hackman died a week later of cardiovascular problems.
The question was he aware that Miss Hackman had died? And I think that question's difficult to answer, but I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
The couple were found in different rooms and were only discovered when a caretaker called at the house and raised the alarm. Tributes have been paid to Gene Hackman by many fellow actors in Hollywood, and his family said he will be sorely missed.
The situation got worse when it was revealed that Leslie Ann had been making plans for her father's assets before his death had even been confirmed. The police discovered that she had been in contact with her father's lawyers and financial advisors, discussing the distribution of his wealth and making changes to his will. These conversations took place while Gene was still alive, but the rest of the world had not yet been made aware of his passing. The fact that Leslie Ann had been preparing for his death before it was publicly known raised alarm bells for everyone involved. How could she have known something no one else did? What was she planning? The more the family learned about Leslie Ann's behavior, the more questions arose. Family members were furious. Some were even more hurt than angry. It was one thing to lose a beloved father and grandfather. It was another to discover that a family member might have been planning to profit off that loss. The Hackman family was forced to confront not just their grief, but the painful realization that their own flesh and blood might have betrayed them in the most unimaginable way. As the media began to get wind of the situation, the fallout grew even more public. The Hackman family, who had always kept their personal lives out of the spotlight, found themselves in the middle of a media frenzy. Reporters camped outside their homes, trying to get statements from family members, while news outlets speculated about the details of Leslie Ann's involvement. The family's every move was scrutinized, and their pain was laid bare for the world to see. Some members of the family tried to stay out of the public eye, hoping the storm would pass. Others felt the need to speak out, to defend Gene's legacy and the integrity of their family name. In the midst of all this chaos, the legal battle over Gene's estate began. The process was ugly and dragged on for months, with Leslie Ann fighting to secure control over her father's wealth. The legal team for the Hackman family pushed back, citing the suspicious changes to Gene's estate documents and her actions before and after his death.
Is this mystery now cleared up, or is there any more that might come out, Emma?
Well, to some degree, they have now answered many questions, but investigators have been trying to piece together the couple's final movements in that week, looking at CCTV, looking at phone records. But this virus that they say Betsy Arakawa contracted, Hunter virus, they say is something they do see several times a year in Santa Fe, though it is pretty rare. It starts off as flu-like symptoms, so it could be mistaken for something else, and of course it can be very serious. But it does paint this rather grim picture that she had died first and that Gene Hackman was in the house alone for a week or so, and that his Alzheimer's means it is very unclear as to how much he would have known as to what was going on or whether he would have been able to get help at all. But after this seemingly mysterious circumstances, now a number of questions have been answered to unravel some of the circumstances that led to Gene Hackman and his wife's death.
It became a full-blown war over his fortune, one that played out in courtrooms and media outlets alike. The more the case progressed, the clearer it became that Leslie Ann's involvement in the estate was not just about inheritance, it was about control. The questions surrounding her actions and the timing of them painted a picture of someone who had been preparing for something long before Gene's passing had been confirmed. The family's pain was compounded by the fact that they now had to fight to protect Gene's legacy. They felt betrayed, not just by the loss of their loved one, but by the realization that someone from within their own circle might have been plotting for their own gain. There was a sense of anger and frustration, but also a deep sadness. The betrayal stung in a way that words couldn't fully capture. It was one thing to lose someone you loved. It was another to learn that someone in your own family might have been involved in their death, or at least in profiting from it. The legal proceedings went on for months, with Leslie Ann's attempts to secure the estate being met with resistance at every turn. She was forced to defend her actions, explaining away the financial transactions and legal maneuvers that seemed to suggest she had been preparing for Gene's death long before it happened. But the evidence was damning. The family had known Gene for years, and they could not reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the person she had become in the wake of his death. The emotional toll of the entire situation was heavy. Some family members felt hopeless and defeated, while others found strength in each other. But one thing was certain: the Hackman family would never be the same again. As the court battles continued, the family knew that the true impact of this scandal would be felt for years to come. Gene's legacy had been tainted, his estate in limbo, and the family fractured beyond repair. While some believed that Leslie Ann's actions were driven by grief or desperation, others saw them as calculated moves to secure wealth at any cost. Regardless of the reasons, the trust between family members had been broken, and it seemed unlikely that it could ever be repaired. The fallout from the estate battle continued to unfold, leaving the Hackman family in turmoil. For them, it was no longer just about money, it was about the pain of losing Gene and Betsy, and the anger they felt about the betrayal that had come from within their own family. The case wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for their family's honor and the preservation of Gene Hackman's legacy.